Voltamos a apresentar o Linkados na Área com a jornalista Deborah Seward. Ela também supervisiona o serviço de comunicação que fornece orientação sobre temas prioritários da ONU, incluindo a paz, a segurança e os direitos humanos. So, Debbie, the United Nations considers journalism as one of the most dangerous professions in the world. The central elements in the support of UNESCO for the freedom of expression in all platforms of media are promoting the security of journalists and fighting against the impunity of the ones who attack them. How do the media companies help to preserve the security of their journalists?
There are a couple of things that are really important. First of all, for those journalists who go into conflict zones, which didn't exist when I was a journalist, is there's training for the journalists, how to take care of themselves, how to know the laws, what to do if you get in trouble, what to do if you get taken hostage. Those are things that actually can be brought and taught to journalists in order so that they can protect themselves. But what's really much, much harder and just as important are how to support those journalists, local journalists, about other issues. Corruption, logging companies, mining companies, environmental protection, those kinds of issues where the threats against journalists are just as great and just as difficult. And I think in those cases what's really important is that the UN and other organizations work to ensure that journalists know the laws, know how to protect themselves, because ultimately journalists actually don't want people to protect them. They want the space and the freedom and the ability to report what it is that they feel should be brought to the attention of the public.
Well, Deborah, it's hard to live in danger, and we know that the investigative journalist lives in constant danger, even when he's on his days off. So our question for you is, do the companies they work for give them protection even on their days off when they're not actively working?
So big companies have a much greater ability to protect their journalists than small companies, and many investigative journalists are actually working on their own. There are citizen journalists who are doing very important work in investigative journalism as well. And what I think is really, really important for investigative journalists is that they are not isolated, and that they are not alone, and that the public itself sees the value of what it is that they are doing. Because the problem that they face, the investigative journalists, is not just them, it's their families, it's their friends, it's all kinds of pressure. And very often those issues aren't talked about, but they are part of the story. And I think that is very critical to tell how it is that you tell the story so that that offers more protection and more ability for those kinds of journalists to do their jobs.
Journalists who invest in the investigative area are usually aware of the risks that come with the job. But there are journalists that don't have a complete idea of the danger, and because of fear eventually hides information they find, which ends up harming the journalist's ethic. Can you comment on that?
I think that you've raised a really key issue, and it goes back to something that I said at the beginning of the program. It is very important not to sensationalize the news. It's very important that it be accurate. It's very important that it be true. And those are things that actually sometimes really require courage. And that's one of the things that's not talked about a lot in journalism, is that it's a profession that requires that kind of courage, if you will, and knowledge of oneself, and evaluating all the possibilities that can happen if you decide to publish that information. Because it's not just for you as the journalist, it's for the people who provide you the information, and it's for the public as well. So it has to be a holistic, if you will, approach to the profession, and particularly in the case of investigative journalists, it can't be rushed.
Well, Deborah, we have another question on our Twitter for you.
At Mazonet asks, Deborah, have you ever been threatened by someone during your work?
Yes, I have.
How was it?
And I've been threatened in the field. I've been detained and arrested several times. And I've been threatened by officials who have made threats if I were to publish a certain amount of information. And I think it was really, really valuable. The first time around, I didn't do a very good job. I was detained in Poland, and in those days there was something called the Helsinki Agreements, which called for freedom of movement for journalists. And I informed the Foreign Ministry when I was convoked to talk about that and was given 72 hours to leave the country. The next time around, what I did was I made sure that I knew the laws and I knew the rules. So I was in Ukraine back in 1991, 92, early in 92, and was detained for trespassing in a closed military zone and requested to sign a piece of paper saying that I had committed this transgression and to leave immediately. The only problem is that this piece of paper was on the stationery of the Union of the USSR. Well, the USSR didn't exist anymore. And they had no right to tell me that I had to sign this paper and leave the country. So I knew and stood up for that. There were no charges, and I was able to actually continue my work. And I was all by myself in that situation. And it wasn't threatening. There was no life threatening. It's not dangerous. But what I think is really important is you have to know and pay very close attention to what it is you're doing, to know the rules, to know the laws, and to make sure that you reach out to other colleagues. I think that's really, there are a lot of you in the room today. You don't have to, these things have gone on before. They will go on again. They're part of the story. They're much more dangerous than that situation, although there are many others. So as I said before, so that one is not isolated and not alone and reach out to others. I think that's really critical.
Estamos apresentando o Linkados na Área com a jornalista Deborah Seward, que exerceu cargos de chefia por mais de 2 décadas na agência de notícias Associated Press e também trabalhou por 8 anos na revista Newsweek. Não deixe de clicar no link para o próximo bloco.